Hi there, and a very warm welcome to this week's video, in which we are going to go over the new features of Octane 2026.1, as I do almost every year. And you knew already that this is this video because you clicked on it. So what we are going to do is look at Cinema 4D and Blender, and following to this introduction, there's a timetable where you can see the times of the features and the applications, so you can jump ahead to the right time that you want. Now, without further ado, as this is a long one, let's grab your coffee. This is really recommended to have coffee for this, and let's jump right in. Small shout out, if you want to get access to the scene files we are using today, as well as other scene files we have used in the past, you can see some of them flashing by, then I will be very happy to welcome you to my Patreon. As you can see, there's a lot of variety in the scene files, smaller ones where you can dive into details such as the materials, and larger ones where you can see how I built up the scene, such as the magnifying glass here or the printed circuit board LED one. And even if you don't want to become a member, I'm delighted to tell you that there are some freebies waiting for you as well, as for example this material ball scene that you can use to test your own materials, but it also comes with a large variety of materials that you also can use on your projects or dissect what I did to them to make them look realistic. Thanks for sitting through this and considering. Now on with the show. And finally, as promised in the beginning, here are our chapter marks. So what we will do is start out with Cinema 4D, then go over the same features inside of Blender, and then end the video on some more arbitrary features. You will find the same chapter marks on your playhead, so you can jump ahead right to the portion that you're interested in. To be honest with you, I had the feeling this release was a little bit rushed, so while some of the features might look great on paper, they can be rather unstable in practice. This is why I took the liberty to sort them by relevance in production for myself. Of course, Otoy will be putting work into that and polishing them over time, but nonetheless, I think it's useful for you to see what you can use in production and what better not. But now, without further ado, let's jump into Cinema 4D. Welcome to Cinema 4D land. Some of you might remember the scene. This is because I made a video series about single features of the new alpha build of Octane, which are now stably released. Well, we will talk about stable later, but we will be covering them all together inside of one video. But let's talk about trace sets, because for the first time in Octane, trace sets lets you control all different path types, for example as reflection of individual objects or groups of objects. Let's say we want the red Christmas ball removed from the reflection of the mirror. What we need to do is find the red Christmas ball, right click and give it a Octane object tag. So go to extensions, Octane and then object tag, and then go to trace sets. In there, what we need to do is add a trace set and then for convenience name it. So let's name it red here, because this is belonging to the red ball. We also have to activate it for the object that is traced, so if rays hit that object, they now belong into this trace set. And I bet you already have guessed what we need to do here. So in the mirror we need another Octane object tag, so flag this open and then give the mirror a object tag by going to extensions, Octane object tag here, go to the trace sets, and instead of marking this red, because this would just add the rays from the mirror to the trace set, we need to add another rule. And of course for us, it's exclude, so if we tick that, then we achieved what we wanted. On the last video with this scene, someone in the comments said this was a missed opportunity to talk about vampire Christmas ornaments, but I argue against that because the whole thing of trace sets is to only exclude it in certain reflections, so we can see in the white Christmas ball it's still visible and reflecting. So if at all, it is a selective vampire Christmas ornament. Now, as the plethora of settings here led on, there's a lot more you can do with trace sets, and I go more in depth in my dedicated video. You can find that in the upper right corner right now. In terms of production usability and stability, I rate this feature a 10 out of 10. Let's move to the next chapter, also an awesome tool, Gaussian Splats. And welcome to the flower pot. Now, people who already seen my tutorial know what this is going to be. Also shout out to Spencer Dickerson again, who gave me the splat model we are going to use today. To show those uninitiated of you what Gaussian splats are, what we can do is go to Objects in the Live Viewer and then load the Gaussian splat object. In there you can load a Gaussian splat. This mostly comes in the form of a PLY file. If we do so, it takes a moment dependent on the size of the splat, and then a sunflower appears. Well, at least for us right now. This actually looks a little bit like a cutout image, but it is not. If we move our camera, you can see it's actually a 3D object here. So what we see here is sort of an evolution of photogrammetry. Instead of capturing images and turning them into polygons, we are turning them into splats. So if we go really close, and we really have to go close, we can see the splats here. So for the lack of a better term, those are the pixels that the sunflower here is made out of. Right now, it's not integrating into our scene too well, and this is mainly because it's missing shadows. To give it shadows though, what we can do, yes, you guessed it, a Octane object tag. So let's give it one, and without further ado, we get shadows and a better integration. The last thing I want to show is that you can also light it, because right now if we turn off our HDRI, it's a light source in its own right. If we go with a less global lighting approach like this conveniently placed area light, you can see the sunflower looks kind of out of place. To mitigate this, what we can do is go back to our splat options and then raise the shadow strength. A value of 1 gives a very unnaturalistic approach, at least for translucent objects like the sunflower. So you simply have to mix and match a bit to integrate the object better into your current lighting situation. I also did a video that goes a little bit more in depth into those settings in the upper right corner if you're interested. Of course, splats are not limited to objects, they can be whole assemblies of sceneries. So this is a very versatile tool for VFX, for example. And also because of the great integration into Octane, I give it a 9 out of 10. If you paid attention to the texture displacement video of mine, or if you're just a knowledgeable person, you know that texture displacement only works on UVs. Unfortunately, this didn't change yet, and you still need UVs or a tag projection from Cinema 4D to make this work. Though you heard correctly, I said yet, because Otoy is working towards a solution where UVs are not necessarily needed anymore. Though this day is not today, so let's have a look at the settings we are getting. If we make the material active, go under displacement and create one, then we are still getting the old behavior of the displacement, but we can easily change that with the new quality dropdown in that we are setting it to high. With this setting, there's another first for Octane, because this allows us to use noises. So if we go with a Cinema 4D noise, for example, plug it in and set it, for example, to displaced Voronoi, you can already see that something is going on here. Whatever you do, you need to make sure that the noise is actually using the UVs. So for now, unfortunately, no XY set to UVW, because this is not working. What is working, on the other hand, is the transform. So if we add a transform and make it rather small, 0.02 for example, then move closer to the object, you can see it's really a lot of high quality detail, and you can make it even higher quality, up to 16K. For us, I think 2K is enough, so let's change that, and you can see there's a little bit more detail showing up. Also, for the first time with texture displacement, you're allowed to use nodes in between, for example a gradient. So let's go with an Octane gradient here, and what this lets us do is remap values. So what we can do is probably something very weird like this, for example. But unfortunately, it's not all sunshine and rainbows, so if I distribute the knots here and then invert them, you can see that there are some artifacts creeping back in. Also, you might have seen that if we move the camera, that the rendering is kind of lagging, and this is because the high quality displacement takes a lot longer to render also. But to be fair, apart from those small downsides, I think this is an incredible improvement. So while keeping those downsides in mind, for production I rated 8 out of 10. And a very warm welcome to Neural Radiance caches. Longtime viewers might recognize the Cornell box scene. The Neural Radiance cache is just a clickable button in the Octane render settings, but in this lighting situation nothing would really change. This is because the Neural Radiance cache was made for difficult lighting situations and also why I opted for putting in a corridor light like this. The door is slightly open and some light is pouring into the room. Of course, right now the room light is helping to fill in the shadows, which is beside the point, so let's turn it off. And for some reason I have to re-render to really turn it off. So let's wait for a second and here we go. So if we let this render for the 512 samples that I've set up, we get this noisy render. Now if we tick Neural Radiance cache, you will see that it will take a while, but then it gets noise-free much quicker. And also you might notice that the overall output is a little bit brighter. So the way I understood how this works behind the scenes is that in real time a neural network is formed on your scene that knows exactly where to shoot the rays to find the light source. And this overall makes sampling more efficient, especially in the beginning of the rendering where you have very few samples. And this makes it a very good option to partner with denoising, because if you denoise, then a low-level noise floor is better than if you have a couple of samples that are very all over the place. Now, as I said multiple times, this only works with difficult lighting situations, so if you have an easy-to-light scene, this would do nothing. But of course, if you really need it, it can be a powerful ally. I haven't tested it in production too much, but I still would give it a 8 out of 10. And welcome to Meshlets. Now you noticed that is further down the list, so it doesn't work that well for me. Some people would say it's nanite ordered from wish.com or we have nanite at home. Of course, there's an asterisk to it. Some people are probably working really hard to make this work, and in the standalone it's working more reliable than in the add-ons. I also noticed it's working more reliably with fewer cards. Now, before I forget to actually show something, this also works via the Octane object tags. So Meshlets is made for objects with very high mesh density, so if I go here you can see those are black blobs now. And if we move closer, you can see it's because of the mesh density. This was an intentional rhyme this time. Let's go back inside of our camera and then go back to view the objects normally, and then finally have a look at the tag. You probably already spotted it. There's a Meshlet tab, so from tags to tabs. And if we click on it, there's a Meshlet enabling button. This is grayed out right now because we need an ID first. Let's go with learning by doing. We can either type in the ID ourselves with the naming that we want, or we can auto-generate one, which is more easy. As you can see, this made the checkbox available, so if we click it, Octane should start the Meshlet process, so it generates the object in different resolutions, and in the end it should look as if there was no change at all. Though, of course, it's not the original mesh resolution, as Octane provides exactly the amount of resolution that is needed from your camera angle. Now, my videos are more tell than show, but usually the mantra is show don't tell. So this time I have prepared an OSL script, and if we exchange that here, then it will need to do the whole thing again. But now you can see the single meshlet parts. And the best part is, if we move around with our camera, you can see that they're dynamically exchanging based on the camera angle. And by now you're probably already going for a couple of minutes that why is there a glass bunny in the scene? Basically what I want to show with this, if we also enable the meshlets for the bunny, you can tell that parts of the glass bunny are actually exchanged as we move the camera. So the algorithm behind that is quite sophisticated. I also have a video where I go a little bit more in depth into the meshlet process, so you can find it in the upper right corner. Now, despite my fears, during the whole recording session here, it didn't crash once, so I'm inclined to give it a higher rating than I initially would have. Also keep in mind that I didn't test it with bigger production scenes. Also, if you have more than 2 graphic cards, it's more unstable than with just 2. So my final rating for now is 5 out of 10. And welcome to texture streaming or virtual textures, which is basically Meshlets but for textures. So it caches the texture in multiple resolutions and then to save some memory feeds it back to you dependent on your camera view. You can think of it a little bit like Google Maps, so if you zoom in Google Maps, the portion you're looking at is reloaded in a higher resolution. Right now I'm just using a 16K map, so no dynamics of any sort is going on right now. So if we move out with the camera, still the whole resolution of the image is shown. To get this going, it's rather easy. Go to your texture loader of choice, then click it to make it active. Go to the attributes and scroll down until you see virtual texturing mode. I clicked on the drop-down expecting an on, but what we get is albedo titles. I'm not sure why it's called this way. Maybe you should only use it for albedo. I could imagine, given the dynamic nature of it, that bump would have a problem. If you click on that, like with Meshlets, Octane will start the conversion process right away. This caching and conversion process, dependent on the size of the texture, can take up multiple minutes. But as you've seen for me, it just flickered, and this is because I pre-cached it before. And of course, the cache is linked by the name of the texture, so if you have cached your texture before and you have your cache at hand, then it will be loaded right away. Which brings me to the point of managing your caches, which can be done under the settings, and then the paths and caching. For Windows, the standard location is app data. Since my C drive is rather full though, I changed it to my cache SSD. But let's finally move the camera and show something. So if we move a little bit faster, you might be able to spot that some of the edges of the frame are reloading. If not, then this is just a sign that the process is working as intended, but we can force it to be shown by going to the virtual texturing bias and set it to a lower value, -3 for example. And you can spot the texture transition if we move the camera now. So it gets even more blurry here, and you can see that there's a bias. Of course, you wouldn't do that usually, it's just to show that we actually indeed have streaming textures. To bring this home, let's actually show what this is good for by flapping open the infos here, and we are roughly at 2.9 gigabytes in our graphics card. So if we bring this back to a normal non-dynamic 16K texture, we end up with more than 3 gigabytes, 3.4 roughly. Right now though, we are just using one texture, so if you do that to a whole scene with a lot of textures, you can save on some real big memory. Now to the downsides, this again worked better than expected, but on Saturday I lost roughly half a day of preparations by dealing with constant crashing. Probably it's down to something with multiple GPUs again. The interesting thing is, it was working in the standalone with all of my cards, it just kept crashing inside of Cinema 4D and Blender. So for me, it really felt like an unfinished beta feature until I realized that with 2 cards, it seems to be working pretty good. So again, the same as with Meshlets, if you have 2 cards, maybe you are good, with more cards, maybe you are not. Therefore, I give it also the same rating, 5 out of 10. And welcome to Blenderland. If you watch the Cinema 4D part, you can see we sort of have the same scenes, so I did the work and converted all of them into Blender Octane. So if you jumped straight to this chapter, you might be asking yourself, what are trace sets, because the name is a little bit unexplanatory. The background though is really cool, so trace sets for the first time gives you the control over the appearance of one or a group of objects to the scene. Or in more concrete terms, what I want to do is get this red ball out of the reflection of the mirror. Traditionally, this would have been possible, but it would have also vanished from all the other reflections in the scene. But using the new trace sets, we can localize this effect to just the mirror. But enough talk, let's jump into action. So the first thing to do is select the source object, so our Christmas ball. Then go to the object properties here, scroll down until you already see the trace sets. The thing to do here is to tag our object or objects with a name. So you can be creative, I'm just lazy and call it red. Here we go. What this does right now is tagging all the rays that interact with this object red, so we can classify what rays have been interacting with this object in the scene. Now that we've done that, let's go to the trace set of the mirror by selecting it. We don't want to tag it because this would mean that everything that interacts with the mirror is now tagged. What we actually want to do is exclude the tagged rays from the mirror. To do that, we need more options. To get more options, we need to click the plus sign here under trace sets, and you can see now we have more options for those trace sets, including the exclude. So what we need to do is exclude the tagged rays here. So remember the name, red. If we do so, then we can see the ball vanishing out of the mirror. Also, you can see this is just the ball vanishing just out of the mirror. You can see reflections in the chrome ball here or even in the framing here. Of course, there's much more to trace sets, including multiple trace sets if we click the plus sign multiple times, but I go over that in an extra video. It's for Cinema 4D though, but you can deduct the information one-to-one to Blender. The link is down in the description below. So if you didn't go over the Cinema 4D part, this year I introduced a rating system for the usability in production use as well as stability. Let's see if that is helpful for you. So this feature I rate as a 10 out of 10. And a very warm welcome to Gaussian Splats, another very exciting feature. Before we go over the process and workflow, let's actually explain what Gaussian Splats are. So basically it's like photogrammetry, where you have your real-world objects and you take photos of it to synthesize an object in 3D space. But rather than synthesizing polygons and textures, what you get out of there is Gaussian Splats. So let me show you by making the splats a little bit smaller, like this. You can see if you go closer that we have those Gaussians here, basically the pixels of our 3D model. The advantage here is that it's really lightweight to render and doesn't need ray tracing because the lighting information as well as reflections or refractions are already baked in. The example I just made was based off usage outside of Octane, for example in a web viewer. Octane itself uses ray tracing of course because it's a path tracing engine. But finally, now that we've covered the basics, let's actually delete the sunflower here again and then bring it back in and show the workflow. And welcome to the workflow part. Now in Blender Octane, there's no importer like in Cinema 4D. Stuff works a little bit differently here. So what we actually need to do is create any object. So I go with a very simple one, for example, a plane. Now, interestingly enough, a lot of the features come through the material system of Octane, including the Gaussian Splat importer. To get our Gaussian Splat in here, what we need to do is select the plane, then go to the material and create one. To avoid chaos, let's call it Gaussian Splat. Here we go. Then in the material, Shift A and search for Gaussian Splat as well. Here we go. And we have a node for that. Since this node tree is only for the Gaussian Splat, we can delete out the material part and then plug the Gaussian Splat in any port. I usually use the displacement here, like this. Next, let's actually load the Gaussian Splat in here by searching it in the folder structure, so I know it's on my 3D scene Gaussian Splats and it's usually a PLY file. Here we go. And by the way, huge shout out to Spencer Dickerson, who provided the beautiful sunflower splat file to be used in this scene. As you probably noticed though, the sunflower didn't pop up yet. We need to do 2 more steps. So we need to go to the mesh data here, and under node graph, we need to select the material that the sunflower is connected to, which is the Gaussian Splat, and also the node the sunflower is in, which also is called Gaussian Splat. Here we go, and now we have a sunflower in our scene. So if you want the sunflower to be elsewhere but the center of your scene, what we need to do is grab the plane and then we can move it and the sunflower will move with it. So what I'm going to do is with the Z axis and move it up 10 units like this. Now as a last thing, what I want to do is go to the environment and rotate it around a little bit so you can see that the sunflower is actually not reacting to the lighting. This is because the sunflower right now is its own light source. This is of course because the Gaussian Splat comes with the lighting it was captured in, though there's a trick in Octane to make it adhere more to the scene, and this is the shadow strength. I don't know why I didn't do this before. Let's hit home to make the node a little bit bigger. Now, since you're bringing multiple lighting realms together, there's always going to be a little bit of mixing and matching. So for example, the shadow strength, if we put it to 1, it looks a little bit weird, especially for translucent objects like the sunflower here. So let's start mixing to bring out the translucency a little bit better. What we can do is loosen up the shadow strength to 0.8, for example. Right now, this is just controlling the shadow though, so if you want to have the influence of the HDRI in terms of lighting, what we can do is in the lighting mode, go with power and color. And this gives us a little bit of a hot sunflower, so what we can do is go to intensity and set it to 0.75 here, for example. And now as we turn the HDRI, this looks much more integrated. Again, I have a Cinema 4D video for this where I go more into detail that you can adapt to Blender one-to-one. If you're interested, the link is down in the description below. And now for the rating. Since this is such a great feature and it's very well implemented, I'm giving it a 9 out of 10. And welcome to the new updated texture displacement. The good thing is that it's very easy to use. It's basically the same workflow as texture displacement. So what we need to do is create a new material, and we are greeted with the behemoth of the universal material. What you can do though is flap in all the sections, all but the geometry properties. And here you can already see the displacement. So if we click the plus button, you can choose between different ones. We of course choose the texture displacement. Here we go. Here in Blender, other than in Cinema 4D, we are using the high setting out of the gate. In Cinema 4D, this was set to normal as default. For the uninitiated, this is the toggle between the old texture displacement and the new high quality one. Speaking of Cinema 4D, the new high quality mode allows us to take in textures other than bitmaps. So what we can do is click on the plus sign and choose a C4D noise. Here we go. What we are still constrained to, unfortunately, is the UVs of the mesh, so our mesh needs to have UVs. Otoy is working towards a solution where this is no longer necessary, but we're still not there yet. So long story short, we still need a UV projection to make this all work. So let's shift click on the plus button and go with mesh UV projection here. Also, this is rather big, so what I want to do is also go with a UVW transform and also make this smaller here. So I'm going with 0.02. And now you should be seeing something. Let's change up stuff a little bit to make it more interesting. So the height here is displayed in meters in Blender Octane. So let's go with 0.002 instead. And also change the noise to a displaced Voronoi. Here we go. As you can see, it's quite detailed already, especially if we move closer here. But if that's not enough, you can also exchange the resolution here up to 16K. For us, let's go with 2K for now. And last but not least for now, not only can we use other textures than bitmaps, we also can use the node tree. To show you, let's bring in a gradient. What this allows us to do is, for example, clamp the texture. So if we move the knots, you can see interesting behaviors appearing. But of course, there are disadvantages too, so you might have noticed the viewport struggling a bit with rendering, and this is because the render time can take a hit with the new high quality displacement. Also, despite being high quality, some of the times I notice still they're creeping in some artifacts, so you can see that best if I go with the inverted knots and go with 0.0075 here, and then you might be able to see that we get some artifacts in between those ridges. So weighing the positives and negatives, I still give it a solid 8 out of 10. And welcome to Neural Radiance Cache, a very sci-fi name, and also, believe it or not, another great feature. If you're familiar with my scene files, you can see I ported the Cornell box room into Blender Octane. I unfortunately didn't have the time to port all the different lighting situations that the Cinema 4D scene comes with, so I opted for the new one, the corridor light, that is fitting to show the Neural Radiance Cache best. The really good thing for me as a presenter here is that it's just a one-click solution, so in the render settings we have the Neural Radiance Cache and we can check it here. It works best in situations just like this. I wonder how this came to be. where the lighting is a little bit complicated and resolves slowly. But I hear you. You say, enough talk, let's check this thing already. So if we do, it takes a little bit to get the neural Radiance cache going. But once we do, the samples will be less coarse and more refined. This pairs extremely well with effects that are reliant on the smoother noise that is not too coarse, for example denoising. I already turned it on, so we are using Open Image Denoise in the pre-filter auxiliary mode and go with a high quality. So let's go to our AOVs and then choose the denoised beauty like this. And you can see it's almost perfect as there's no splotches inside. Now, this one has a slight render overhead as well, and I haven't tested it too much in production. Also, since the Radiance cache is a neural network that forms from the lighting and therefore optimizes it, I also noticed that it can cause slight variations in the lighting that plays out in the scene. But overall, I would rate it a great feature, so the score is 8 out of 10 again. And welcome to the world of Meshlets. If I had to put it in one sentence, and if you know Unreal, I would say this is Nanite for Octane. But if you don't know what Nanite is, let me try to explain. So if we change to the mesh view of the scene, you can see those meshes are incredibly dense. They seem almost black here. So Meshlets will chop the mesh up and then generate different resolutions per each chunk that then can be served dependent on the distance and the camera angle. Of course, this feature exists to reduce memory usage of the scene by serving only the resolution that we really need and see. A small word of caution or even warning, I have 4 cards and when I used all of them, it behaved really unstable. When I unticked 2 of them and only worked with 2, it started to work as intended. Now let's finally go over how this works. Fortunately, this is not too hard to do. As this is part of the mesh, we need to go to the data section of the object and there you can already see it, Meshlets, and convert to Meshlet. But before we turn on Meshlets, it's actually recommended to turn off the rendering for this process and also of course select the object that we want to turn into Meshlets. So now with the wooden box selected, let's go and check this and we are greeted with a mesh ID. This ID is needed because the resulting Meshlet meshes are stored to disk and this will be used to identify this object. So the easy thing to do is to copy the name and paste it in here. If we did this process to all the meshes that we want to change into Meshlets, for now it's just the grade here, we can start rendering. It will take a while, but once there, you can see the processing of the Meshlets in real time. Here we go. And if everything worked according to plan, you shouldn't be able to see a difference to the original grade if we move around with the camera. Seems legit. But I also have a bonus. If we go to the material section, scroll up and then choose the OSL material, that will take a while to regenerate, but once done, we can see the Meshlets live. Here we go. And now if I move the camera, you get a better indication what's going on with the changing tiles dependent on the camera view and the distance to the object. And as a last point for Meshlets, you probably asked yourself why there's a Stanford bunny in the scene. I wanted to show that this chunked mesh here is also working for transparent or refractive objects. So let's again turn off the rendering, select the bunny here, go to the mesh and then go to Meshlets. Let's scroll down here and enable it. Select the name, copy and paste it in here, and then start rendering again. And now you can see if we move around the camera that the transparency is working, and if we let it render, there's no chunkiness inside of the bunny. And this is Meshlets. The instabilities I experienced took the rating down quite a bit, so I rate this with a 5 out of 10. And welcome to dynamic texture streaming. Basically, this is Meshlets, but for textures. So it will cache out textures in different resolutions to disk and then stream them back in the right resolution for the camera angle and distance of the object. And of course also because of the same reason to save some resources. Now, same as in Cinema 4D before, I loaded my 16K Earth map so we can go close without losing too much detail. And of course, it goes without saying that it uses a lot of resources, so if we look at the data, the memory usage is roughly 6 GB. To activate this feature, you just have to go to your image loader and look at the virtual texturing section, and switch that from off to albedo tiles. Now in Cinema 4D, this was called albedo titles, so I wasn't quite sure what this naming scheme was. Seems like I answered my own question and this is a spelling mistake. I think the name is also a usage instruction because albedo is the most easy texture to use. Think of a bump map, it wouldn't work this nicely in different resolutions. But let's go back and look what happened when I switched to albedo tiles. If I go to off again, we are ending up with roughly 6 GB again, 6.5. And if we go to albedo tiles, this is now 5.5. So we shaved off 1 GB of data. As you've noticed, the switch back and forth goes very smooth. This is because we already have cached the texture and is linked by name. So other than Meshlets, this is not regenerated every time I hit render. It is cached to disk and loaded if we go and turn it on. If you switch a texture to albedo tiles for the first time, of course there needs to be a conversion. This is done on the CPU and can take quite a while. For this 16K by 8K texture that I loaded, it took roughly 1 minute on an 18-core processor. Now, let's finally show this in action, so if we whip around, you might be able to see that some tiles are reloaded. If not, then this is working as intended. To show you the process a little bit better, what I can do is go to the level of detail selection bias and turn it down into the negative range, so the earth becomes blurry. And now if we move around, you can see that we get different blur states of the earth's texture dependent on the camera distance. Unfortunately, same as with the Meshlets, if I go to my card settings, I needed to turn off 2 of my cards to make this stable. So with all of my cards active, it just kept crashing. Hopefully this can be mitigated in the future by the excellent Otoy developers. Until then, I have to rate it the same as the Meshlets, 5 out of 10. And congratulations, you made it through the bulk of it. Let's go into rapid fire mode for the Beyond section. Octane now supports Material X. This is part of the Universal Scene Description or USD. You will find traces of it in Blender as well as Cinema 4D. The crown jewel though is the standalone where you can load USDs and Material X will be loaded with it. I was surprised myself that it was as easy as dropping in an USD file and everything worked out of the box. Well done! There's a new material in town and it's a big one. Otoy just can't get a hold of their material addiction, can they? This one is modeled after the physical-based rendering standard, so PBR, so you can recreate materials that are using this standard. I tell you that, it takes a while to go through all its features. Another new thing that came in with Material X is typed textures. This didn't trickle down to Cinema 4D, but the most obvious thing, you can finally stream an alpha channel out in one noodle with your image. There's more to it as classification between vectors and color. It's all really new and mostly has to be integrated into the plugins first. Historically, Octane had very few vertex attributes. Only 4 for floating attributes and only 2 for colors. But rejoice, Octane 2026 comes with 10 each, 10 float and 10 color attributes for everyone. By the way, if you don't recognize it, the color attribute there should be a thumbs up. And this brings us to the benchmark scene. I usually use my trusted scenes, which are the third hand, the keyboard, the meter scene, and the caustic caps scene. I render them in standalone and then compare the results against each other. Let's start with the bad news. The VRAM usage is increased across the board. This usually comes with feature increases as the increase of usable vertex maps that we just discussed before. Though with the memory crisis at hand that is raging right now through the land, I really hope this can be optimized in the future. And now the good news, RAM usage stayed roughly the same compared to last year's version, and also render times didn't increase. All but the caustic caps that is, I don't know what happened there. And this is it. If you watched all the way through the end, then thank you so much for doing this. I hope you got something out of it. This was a tremendous amount of work that put me through multiple nights, so hopefully you appreciate it. And with this great finale, this should be it for this year. I allow myself a little bit of rest, so we will see each other in the first weeks of the new year. In the meantime, although there are unfortunately dark clouds on the horizon, I wish you the best Christmas time, and as we say in Germany, a fantastic slide into the new year. Thank you one more time, and to not make this too long, let's also thank those people who made this video possible. Of course, my Patreons. Especially my €50 tier subscribers, Shields Augustinen and Leon Studio TV. Also, of course, a huge thank you for my €15 tier subscribers, for Die Thieves, Alessio De Vecchi, Chris Fritchie, 5-in-1 Designs, Ami Schiedried, Christian Grajewski, Daryl, Graham Bucknell, Grigoris Morikis, Guillaume Lollier, Ivan Tanasiewicz, Joel Mackemer, John Edward, Keith T., Chris Clemson, Mike Rogers, Mikkel Obenhuis, Ness Graphics, Nico Straub, Part 1 of 2, Ralf, Random Capybara, Reiko, Stefan Harmanus, Shiro 2049, Zoo Shag, Terry Wayne Ranson, Jan Verbeeke, Yasin Rupp, and Yuri Starikov. Hey there for the very few people that probably still hanging on here and made it to this section. It's very early in the morning and I worked through the night, so I'm making this short. I mentioned this before, I don't know why, but all of my recent videos took very long to make. Either I want to get more quality in my videos, or I'm getting older and slower. Probably both. I'm looking so forward to do small and snappy videos again. Now, as always, for today's video, if you want to help me fight against the algorithm overlords, let's post a Christmas tree in the comments down below. It's a little bit cliché, but I didn't find any other fitting emoticon for today. If you find something better, then please surprise me. With that, I wish you a great Tuesday, a fantastic time ahead, again a great Christmas time and a good slide into the new year, and I'll keep it classic and say happy rendering. Bye!